Well, howdy doody once again. And here's another reading from another William Least Heat Moon book called Roads to Quoz. This is the opening story in this book, and probably by far the best. It's all about humanity, as we were talking about earlier this evening. It's called Mrs. Weatherford's Story. Now, the author is on a Mississippi steamboat with some elderly ladies, very wealthy, and they're talking about their possessions and things, probably not in a I've got more than you way, but they're talking about what they've got, who they are. And all of a sudden, this 80-year-old Mrs. Weatherford comes up with her story. And she says, "None of you know, I grew up in North Arkansas, the western side, in the hills. It was mostly rocks, soil no thicker than worn out muslin. Everything except our chickens we had to get out of a creek bottom field so small Papa could plough it with a mule in a day. The hills were good for the firewood and some walnuts and a squirrel or two. We didn't eat coon. Usually dessert was a half-dozen verses from the Bible, King James Version." She paused and picked up my tumbler of whiskey and held it up against the dusky western sky to make the liquor gleam in a deepened hue. She put the glass down again and said, "My mother would call that the colour of sin. To her, it was the distillation of damnation. She said, Papa made a clear corn whiskey that would burn the gallstones out of your uncle's brother." "You're talking moonshine?" one of her friends asked. "White lightning, bottled in the barn booze, Ozark nose paint, field whiskey. By whatever name you want. Mama knew it as sin, and she knew it was only a question of time before the Lord was going to settle up with Papa." Now, at her insistence, he would read the evening Bible verses to us, but he could just as well have been reading the labels on a feed sack. And when it came to his still, there wasn't anyone, man or woman or wife, going to argue out of him on that. And the Sunday school teacher didn't help, because he was known to accept on the quart every holiday, including his birthday. He drank this quart in his cellar and never showed himself until he'd finished it all and slept it off. The congregation said that his wife was usually down there with him, and sometimes we heard they'd get plumb naked. Otherwise, he was vociferous against alcohol, and Mama accepted him because she thought his words might work on somebody. He liked to say, "I have known the jeopardous sin of liquor," as if those days were past. And of course, Mama knew that without the money from Papa still, she'd be hard-pressed to set the table 3 times a day for the 4 of us. I'm talking now of the early 30s. Even our church dresses had mendings over the mendings. Papa wasn't above nipping into some of his finishings, but never in front of us children. Even on a cold night, if he had a couple of nips, he'd stay down in the shed where the works were, curled up near the fire. He called it the works. I think he drank mostly because of our poverty. He was ashamed of not providing more for us. Mrs. Weatherford, once she had our attention, would take long pauses, holding them like a concertmaster, just to the right moment. Then she'd follow on with her memory, as if it were a score she knew well, but hadn't conducted in years. Nodding towards the sunset, she said, "Over there, it's almost like the Northern Lights. They call them the Northern Lights because they don't shine in the south, or at least not very often down this way. In northwest Arkansas, they hadn't shone ever so far as anyone back then could recall. Nobody had any idea what they were." Well, and here she took her first long pause. They did shine one night, and they did it with a glory, as if they were making up for all those years of dark skies. One evening, Mama came out of the kitchen onto the porch to sit a spell before bed. My older sister, Maylene, and I were there waiting for her. It was late in the year, and she had her shawl on. She sat there humming a hymn, collecting herself, always wanting to be ready for salvation. She stopped in the middle of her hymn and said, "Why, girls, look over there in that corner of the sky." And she pointed to the north, toward a long ridge that was sort of shut in. "The art goods barn must be on fire." It was well past sundown, but the sky was rosy like dusk, except that the bright sky was in the north. We went round the house to the front to see better, and there it was. The whole north was a pale curve of light rising from the tree line. We stopped and stood and watched until we were certain it was truly getting brighter. Mama went to the window to holler up Papa to come outside. He stepped out on the front stoop in his union suit he slept in when the weather cooled. By now there were rays like searchlights shooting up. Then the bottom part started turning orange and flickering like fire. Papa said, "That ain't the hat goods." And Mama said, "Oh dear Jesus." I thought this was all good fun until I saw her face. She was alarmed, alarmed bad, and I looked at Papa. It was the same expression on his face when he saw Maylene fall off of the mule. "I'm vowing to you," Mrs. Weatherford said, "the sky was like the old picture show curtain in Fort Smith. The sky was moving the way folds in the curtain swung when it got pulled open or closed. We stood there, watching, until lower down the sky started getting even brighter, and rays seemed to kind of clump up and form into big, flickering crowns, just like a king would wear. At the sight of that, Mama stepped back so sharply she banged her head against the house and didn't even know it. She said, "It's here, it's here, it's happening tonight. This is the night." And she grabbed me and Maylene and started pulling us toward the house. "What's here?" Maylene said. "What's happening tonight, Mama?" "The Lord, child, the Lord. The Lords are coming." Now, she was a practical woman, more clear-headed under pressure than Papa was, who was still standing there in his droopy union suit and his mouth hanging open. I was starting to cry. Maylene said, "Should we get under the bed?" "No, child, you don't hide from the Lord. You girls go inside and put on your church dresses and lay out straight on the bed. And I mean straight." She shoved us toward the house and then called out in an afterthought, "And wash your feet." We did it fast, but we didn't get in bed. We went to the window. Now the sky had flashes coming from below like gigantic flames. Mama had hold of Papa's arm and was shaking it and talking fast. All I heard was, "And Cloyd, I mean now." The whole sky seemed to be on fire. Mama saw us in the window and yelled, "Get into bed and get ready. Ready. The gates of Hades have been opened, girls." She and Papa disappeared around the back and headed down into the hollow toward where the still was. But we didn't get into bed. We went to the back porch and hid in the shadows. There were terrible sounds. Mama shouting, something smashing into wood and metal, glass breaking, and every so often a shower of sparks rose up. That went on for maybe 20 minutes. And then we smelled smoke. And then we saw a glow in the treetops down in the hollow. Maylene said, "Papa's burning the works." It didn't take long. We saw Mama coming toward the house. We ran back to the bed and got ourselves all laid out like we'd been told. She came to the door and looked in on us. I said, "I'm scared, Mama." She stepped into the room and stood over us. "This is Judgment Day, girls. If you've done right, you'll be ascending. Graves all over the country are opening. The arising has begun. The glory has come." And she left the room. Then Maylene started crying. She was afraid resurrection zombies were going to come forth and reach through the window and carry us off to damnation. Then Papa came back. He wasn't scared anymore. We heard him say to Mama, his voice was so weary and so defeated, "It's gone. Every last quart of it gone." And Mama said, "Our need for money has gone too, Cloyd. This is all dross now. Wash yourself and come in and pray with us." Mama called into the front room and told us to get down on our knees. Maylene said, "Are we going to die now?" And Mama said, "Girls, I can't tell you." I've never been through one of these before. Papa came in with his church shirt on. I don't know whether his face was red from the fire or from crying. Mama commenced praying, pointing out how we little ones were too young to have much sin attached to us. Then she took up Papa's cause, a more complicated one, given the liquor and his occasional cussing. I don't remember much of it because I was watching the window. The sky had faded, but there was still enough light to see Jesus when he appeared to call us home. After a while we went back to bed to wait, and the next thing I remember is that the window was white with light, and Maylene was asleep with her mouth open. I poked her to see if her soul had ascended yet. "Quit it," she said. Apparently it hadn't. It was dawn. I got up. My Sunday dress was a mess of wrinkles. I went down to the hollow, to where the works had been. It was just a heap of ashes, and some twisted and scorched metal and broken glass everywhere. Everybody was up when I got back. Papa was at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. He would not talk. Mama said, "We'll just go about our affairs until the Lord or one of his angels comes for us. But first, get down on your knees." And she went on to praying again, pointing out the innocence of children, making specific comment about her responsibility for the time in the schoolyard when the elastic in my underpants broke and let them fall to the ground. Then she called on Papa to ask forgiveness, but he just kept his head on the table. So she tried to intercede for his sin in the hollow, emphasizing that the liquor he made was to provide for his family, and besides, now he'd renounced distilled damnation by destroying the machinery of the devil and pouring the liquid hellfire into the ground. At that, Papa raised his head as if to say something, but only a little moan came out, and he just put his weary head back down. Mama went on, working her way into her sins, leaving a few out, like judgmentalism. But before she could finish, we heard the sound of some old flivver come spluttering up towards the house. Maylene ran to the front porch and said, "Is Jesus coming for us in a Ford car?" I went to the window and peeked from behind the curtain. I told them I didn't think it was Jesus, unless Jesus wore baggy seersucker pants and the slouch hat. We were all frozen. Even Papa had his head up. There was a rap at the door that might have well been a rifle shot. We all jumped so. Nobody moved. I'd never seen Mama so fixed. There was another rapping, and a voice said, "Hey, in there, Lampkin." Papa, maybe figuring he had nothing more to lose, slowly went to the door. "Lampkin," the voice called again like a summons. Papa opened the door, opened it real cautious. The voice spoke again, too low for us to understand, and Papa turned to us inside and said, "'Tain't Jesus, it's a fella from Iowa." Aware that it might be Jesus in disguise to test her charity, Mama ordered Papa to let him in. The stranger stepped in, removed his hat, and turned it nervously in his hands. Nobody said a word. We were waiting for him to tell us how to proceed to heaven, or perhaps Hades. In Papa's case, the man just twiddled his hat. Maylene whispered to me, Jesus hadn't shined his shoes. Finally, to break the silence, he said, there was some show in the sky last night. Papa said, tell my missus while you're here. Can you imagine it? Mama was about to hear Jesus address her with his instructions for her salvation. If you could see her face, it was saying, yes, Lord, show me the way, Lord Jesus, oh the glory. The stranger, still fiddling with his hat, turned to Papa to make sure he was to divulge his mission. Tell her, Papa said. Go ahead. Well, ma'am, I'm passing through, you see, and I got directed out here to your place. Mama, so excited, interrupted him. And you've come for us. And he said, ma'am, I just came for a couple of quarts. Here, Mrs. Weatherford conducted a long pause, the longest yet, and she punctuated it with a sip of her vodka. Poor Mama, she said. Why, that stranger didn't come to carry away her soul. He came to carry away a couple of quarts of Arkansas nose paint. But then Mama recovered. Fast recovery was one of her strengths. It was a test, and she and Papa had passed it. In triumph, she said, gone. All of it gone. Cleansed with a righteous fire. Gone. It was too much for Papa. He went back to his chair and buried his head in his hands again. The stranger didn't quite understand, but he knew something was wrong. He said, did you folks have a fire last night? I'm smelling smoke or something. Mama said, a righteous fire, right here on earth, right here last night. One to match that glorious one of yours in the sky. The man who was stepping toward the door to leave said it was a glory for certain last night. It was as good as we used to see them up North Iowa, but I never seen so much flickering orange before. At that, Papa raised his head. What's it you're talking about? And the stranger said, them lights last night. That auroral borealis, or whatever they call it. You know, them northern lights. Papa got up real slow and went to the stranger and said, that's what northern lights is? All them moving colours? That's them, the man said, and excused himself. He could smell trouble. Papa told us to go to our room and close the door. We heard him yelling, and then there was a terrible thud, and we came rushing out. Jesus must be throwing Papa like he did the moneylenders. But there Papa was, standing over Mama, who was sprawled on the floor with a bloody lip. He was saying, I just hope you didn't know all the time, because if you did, then he hurried out to catch the stranger before he got away. Loud enough for Mama to hear, he said to the stranger, "Give me 10 days. You'll have to bring your own jugs." Mrs. Weatherford stopped and drained her little glass. One of her friends said, "And your mother?" Mrs. Weatherford thought about it. Mama took that as final proof that some men can't ever, by any force, be healed. Her time with Papa would be in this world, and only in this world. Then, cradling her empty glass, Mrs. Weatherford closed her eyes and seemed to be gathering herself. There was something more. The last lines of her recollections were always something more. "My mother," she said quietly, "was so locked into her notion of an afterlife of one kind or another that she didn't put much value on their final years together here on earth." That's the end of that chapter. Then he goes on to talk about the rest of the road trip. I thought that was a really beautiful passage. The humanity of it. The humanity of it. He's able to draw these incredible stories out of people. And wasn't that a lovely story? I'll leave you with that. As always, I love you. And hi to the family, and I love them too. See you guys soon, in the spring. And you and I is going to go to New Mexico and look at some rocks. I think. Rocks, is it? Cool. Okay. Talk soon. Bye.